On today's show, I'll be interviewing Fru N. This is going to be a change up from our normal kind of interview. Normally, the people I talk to are experts in health and wellness or public policy or both. But as we're talking this season about issues of our own relationships with technology and data, I wanted to bring on a specialist from a different perspective. The Healthier Tech podcast is about creating healthier relationships with technology. So I wanted to chat with an expert who can help illuminate this from the perspective of the tech itself, how it functions and how it's designed to function, all the various issues that go into its creation. Fru is a data evangelist and an IT expert with a master's degree in enterprise architecture from Penn State, and he runs the group Enterprise Data Ninjas. He's worked in enterprise architecture, data science, and machine learning with several Fortune 500 companies in multiple data-heavy industries, including retail, banking, health services, and food and hospitality. And today we're going to chat about the new age of data that we're in.
Having an understanding of what data is, I think, is really lay a foundation for why we're seeing this seismic shift in the industry for companies looking to collect data.
Before we begin, a brief word. This podcast is brought to you by my company, Shield Your Body, where it is our mission to help make technology safer for you and your loved ones to enjoy. Inspired by the life's work of my father, Dr. Martin Blank, one of the world's leading EMF scientists, I founded Shield Your Body in 2012, and we provide a ton of great and free resources for you to learn all about EMF radiation, like articles, ebooks, webinars, and videos. And we also have a world-class catalog of laboratory-tested EMF and 5G protection products. From our phone pouch and laptop pad, all the way up to our bed canopy. All of our products are laboratory tested and include a lifetime warranty. Learn more about our products and why we have hundreds of thousands of satisfied customers around the world at shieldyourbody.com. That's shieldyourbody, all one word, .com, or click the link in the show notes. And use promo code POD to save 15% on your first order, with free shipping throughout North America, the UK, and Europe. Hi, Fru. Welcome to the Healthier Tech podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here.
No, I really appreciate you making the time. So my listeners have just heard your intro, but could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Oh, yes. So I am I'm a data evangelist. I think that's the term I really like to go with. And what that means is I help companies understand the value of data, understand the value of AI, machine learning, data ops, and how they can take advantage of that to meet their business objectives, to serve their customers better, to innovate better, and to come up with better products. So that's a lot of what I spend my time doing, just helping companies be data-driven. From a credential perspective, I hold a master's degree in enterprise architecture, and it's exactly what it sounds. So just helping enterprises align their business objectives with the architecture that supports those objectives. And it could be data architecture, security architecture, technology and infrastructure architecture, and just bringing all of that together. So a lot of my time is spent in the data space, and that's what I do on a daily basis.
That's great because in this interview, I'm really glad that we were able to connect, because the goal today is I want to help my listeners get some insight into how the sausage is made. We hear all the time about issues regarding abuse of personal information, data privacy, data control. There are terms like GDPR, CCPA, CCRA. There's a Facebook whistleblower in the news all the time now. And most of my listeners, like I think many consumers, read about this stuff and they're kind of baffled about how these systems emerge. So that's why I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today, so you can help educate us about how these decisions get made behind the scenes. As a starting point, I think it would be helpful if you could help us understand or visualize just how much data is being collected. I mean, we hear the term big data all the time. How big is big data?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I'm going to actually take a step back to answer that question to just talk about data, right? Because usually we talk about big data, but having an understanding of what data is, I think, could really lay a foundation for why we're seeing this seismic shift in the industry for companies looking to collect data. So at the fundamental level, data is just facts, figures that represent the world. So just imagine, long time ago, a caveman went out and hunted, two elephants or two antelopes, and they came back and they wrote that on the wall. They drew some writing on the wall. That was data that was collected at the time. Fast forward to the printing press, the Gutenberg printing press, and we had better ways of collecting data. And that was writing. Fast forward to the electrical devices with radios and television. We had even better ways of collecting data, which is a representation of the world. Fast forward that to the invention of the PC, the personal computers. We have better ways of collecting data. But ultimately, this is a representation of the world. Whether we're talking about someone going out for hunting or someone going to a sporting event, and we want to tell that story and collect data to tell that story, humans have been doing this for a long time. The challenge that we've had in the past, where there was an asymptote, was the ability to collect data. So humans always have this desire to collect as much data, to tell as much story as possible. But the limiting factor, the asymptote, has always been the technology at hand. In the past, it was drawing on cave paintings. When printing came or writing, we could write books, but you were limited to the number of books you can write. Now, when we went into the age of digitization, we had even more capacity to collect even more data. And so we're seeing this massive tsunami, I call it, of data collection or data utilization because technology is allowing us to do it. And so for the very first part, we've gotten to that age where both the technology and the capacity allows for organizations to collect data at scale. Now, big data is a piece of that. What is big data? When we talk about big data, I'm sure a lot of your audience might have heard about big data. The industry usually defines that in using three V's: volume, velocity, and variety. So meaning collecting data with larger volume. So we're talking about, not just your, basically terabytes. We're talking about petabytes or even more of data. And this is huge. The velocity is how quickly can we collect this data? What is the speed of collecting this data? So in the past, maybe we can collect, data every day, but now we can collect data every second or down to the millisecond. So the velocity has increased. The last piece of that V is the variety, meaning the types of data we can collect has increased. So instead of just writing, being able to collect that, we can collect audio. So this podcast we're having, the conversation here, is collected. We can collect PDFs. We can collect images. We can collect X-ray scans. We can collect MRI images. You can put telescope up in the sky and look at the solar system, and you can collect data from that. So different varieties of data is being collected. And all of that, the volume, the velocity, and the variety is really what is causing this push of big data that we're seeing. And here's an interesting statistics for you, and I think this will be fascinating to your audience, which is the data in existence today. The last 2 years, we've created more data than was created from the dawn of humans prior. So,
wow.
So it's an exponential growth. It's not even a linear one, and it's really mind blowing if you think about it.
And that's going to continue, I imagine, right? So in 2 more years, we could say the same thing.
Exactly. So yeah, in 2 more years, I was saying exact same thing, and it's interesting to think about it not as a linear growth, exponential. So in 2 years, we create more data than we ever did from the dawn of time, and it's partly because the technology is allowing us to do so.
So I know that, and thank you for that. Was really helpful visualization. I really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. So I know that I don't know if it's fair to say that you share many of my concerns about data and big data, but I think you understand them, but you're also a big proponent of the value of big data. Can you speak a little bit to that value? What value do you see in big data, and in particular, why should consumers be happy that big data exists?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it really comes down to a balancing act. that I see in the industry, being a practitioner in the space, being someone who makes the sausages, as you said at the beginning. I get to see a lot, and there is a lot of debate around data and privacy, and rightly so. I think it's time we have those conversations, and I think we're going to get into that later on here. But the balancing act is understanding that there is also value in data, which is what makes companies be so attracted to it. And just to give you an idea, from statistics, we're hearing over 10 to 15 trillion in economic value to be gotten from data by 2030. This is what some of the research firms are talking about, right? So when you hear about that 15 trillion of economic value, that's value, right? And companies want to be a part of that. And that's why we're seeing this gold rush where companies are looking at it, executives are looking at it and saying, well, how is my company positioned to be a part of that? How can my company deliver and gain part of that value to be delivered in or to be realized by 2030? And so this is really a push about economics. It's a push about survival for a lot of companies. They want to be relevant, and it requires them taking advantage of data. Now, to go one level deep into that, from the different industries. So whether we're talking about healthcare or we're talking about education or politics, data is providing value across the board. So just take medicine, for example, which is a big field that I play a lot of role in. Personalized medicine is a huge thing in the industry today. If you go out to get, say, a cancer treatment, someone going out to get cancer treatment, now they're looking at saying, can we get more data about the cancer that's affecting people so they can provide more tailored, specific medications to a specific cancer based on the specific individual's profile. And it takes data to be able to personalize medicine to that level. And what that leads to is better outcomes, better health. And I think a lot of people would appreciate that if they can use data to make people live better life and be more healthy, people could find that good. Another area is education, using data for more tailored curriculums. So not every student is going to learn at the same pace or understand every subject equally well. So can big data be used to understand individual students and the areas in which they struggle to come up with personalized education for each student? So instead of this massive fire and forget kind of approach where a teacher just stands in front of the classroom and regurgitates the same subjects to every student, could it be a student who is struggling in algebra or linear algebra or calculus gets more emphasis in that area compared to somebody who is not struggling in that area? And it takes data to realize that. Go to politics, right? Go into medicine, go into sports. Almost every industry, and I can go on and on. Banking is seeing value from data. And that's why we're seeing this push of companies saying, okay, we want to be a part of this gold rush and collect as much data as we can and use that. Now, there is going to be downsides, and I can talk about that too as well if you...
Yeah, no. I think we will definitely get to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I that was really helpful because I think, when a lot of people read these stories in the news, like the Facebook whistleblower, and they hear about big data, they assume big data is about how Mark Zuckerberg figures out how to give you an ad from Jeff Bezos to buy a new, whatever product they think you want. But you're showing that there's actual tangible value for consumers in terms of better healthcare, better education, and those are very high value. Those are very high value subjects. So I appreciated that that explanation. And before we get into some of the controls and the cultural issues, there's just one more kind of buzzword or keyword I wanted to throw into the discussion. And that's based on this big data. We're hearing a lot more about the advance of things called machine learning and AI, or artificial intelligence. And I know you have expertise in this, so I'm hoping you could take a moment to explain in very basic terms what these technologies are, machine learning and AI, and how the increasing prominence of them impact data control and privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good question. Machine learning and AI is a big part of the industry, which is growing at exponential rate. With all the data available, what machine learning does is it helps using algorithms and specialized statistical models to gain insights from data. So we're talking about not just looking at reports, so being able to report numbers and statistics from what happened, but being able to get into more prescriptive types of insights. So let's take an example. Let me use actual examples here. Let's say there is a sporting event happening in a town, and people go to that sporting event. You can use machine learning to run statistics to say, okay, we had 5,000 people attending that event, but can we take this one step further to predict that for the next sporting event, how many people would come in there, right? And so this is where we're seeing a lot of advancements in machine learning, in AI, in neural networks, deep neural networks, all coming up with very specialized algorithms to help with problems like that. One of the biggest challenge in the industry was vision, or is vision. So being able to drive cars. So can you put a car on the road and have that car drive itself by looking at its surrounding, gathering data from its surrounding, using cameras or lidars or different technologies, and be able to navigate itself without hitting pedestrians, without it just making a mess. So there's been a lot of advancements in AI from that perspective, and so we're seeing that in the real world with Tesla and with a lot of different startups that are coming up, being able to promise the idea that we're gonna have self-driving cars on the road, and that's all a result of AI. Now, AI is a very interesting area to talk about, and I love this area just because I think it's the next frontier, because it brings together three things, three key pillars. Number one is the data itself. You cannot really have AI without data. So companies have to collect this massive data. The second piece is being able to have the algorithms that analyze the data. So these are algorithms that are making decisions, right? And so we're seeing a lot of advancements in that with neural networks and different algorithms in that space. XGBoost, people would know that area, will understand that. And then the last piece of it is the hardware. And so with hardware, you hear of advances in GPUs and CPUs and really fast hardwares that you can have a watch that can look at your face and answer phone calls. And we have hardwares that can be miniaturized to that level to allow for those machine learning models to work. Now, when I talk about machine learning, the biggest area of concern that people, and I think your audience would really appreciate this, is what is happening is, are we getting to the point of letting machines make decisions? Because if you think about it, our making decisions is a very sacred thing as a human, right? I always imagine that if I have to decide to do something, I'm making that decision. It's my choice to make that decision. Now, if we are getting to the point where machines are getting to make decisions for us using algorithms, what does that mean for the sacredness of making decisions? And I think this is where that debate is coming up a lot. How much should machines have? What authority or what latitude should they have to make decisions for us? Be it the decision of what show I should watch on Netflix, or what recommendation engine, or what, if you go on Amazon and you're looking at the recommendation engine there, if you buy this, then you can buy that, right? They recommend that to you. Or if you're on YouTube and you're watching this podcast, on the side they're recommending other podcasts you should watch. If you're on Facebook and you're looking at a friend, they're recommending other friends that you might like because of this. Right now, machines are getting to make those decisions and put out those informations for us. And this is where there is that friction, because people find that kind of, I would say, creepy to a certain extent. And that's where we're getting a lot of the debate around that.
Yeah, and it, the machines might be making those recommendations, but the humans decided what recommendations the machine should be making. So
Exactly.
yeah,
You
and so when you
humans
talk,
build those algorithms. Yeah.
yeah, no. So when you talk about that tension, like how bring us in, because you've been in the room when these
Mhm.
types of discussions happen, and obviously we're not talking about any specific client or company in particular, but in general, what do those discussions sound like? How do these decisions get made? Like what should we, how invasive should we be? What should we be recommending? How expansive should we be?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I'm gonna try to keep it at a very high level here, just to give a sense of it. If you think about companies, there's always the idea of the bottom line, and even the top line that you need to meet. So, a good example is the media and advertisement space for campaign and effectiveness. If you go out and you're shopping for a car, the moment you go to Google and you type, you know, Toyota, right? And then all of a sudden, you go to Facebook, you see those cars around. You go to LinkedIn, you see the cars around, and this ad starts following you around. And now the question is, the companies that are making that decision, what is their motivation? Ultimately, they have a very simple motivation, right? Which is they want to sell cars. They want to meet their revenue targets. But should that be the only motivation companies have? And this is why you're seeing the push of ESG, so the environmental, social, um, sustainability, and governance are really coming into play to say, you know what? Sure, you can make decisions that would meet your bottom line. That's one way of looking at it. But you also have to be ethical. You also have to take into considerations the people you're making the decisions for. So if a company can meet their bottom line by buying ads from Facebook to target you and follow you around as you go from one device to another device, just to pressure you into buying a car, at what point do they have to stop pushing you or giving you the option to opt out from that campaign if you don't want to be a part of it? And I think this is where we're seeing the push and pull. And I've talked about this a lot, right? It's gonna have to be three key pillars happening here, right? The first one is the technology. The technology allows us to do it. Technology can do a lot of things, right? There are technologies out there that can literally watch you in your room and know what you're doing, listening to you, what you're saying in the room. And don't even get me started with that, because there are just devices and gadgets out there that are very capable of doing that, right?
That's
And if they
creepy.
hear it's creepy, and it is, and that's why having this conversation is a very worthwhile uh, discourse, because people then get to be aware of it and they can make very informed decisions about how they use these technologies or not use the technologies. So number one, the technology is very capable of doing things. The second aspect to it is politics. If technology can do A, does that mean we should do A? And that's where politics comes in to say, okay, let's put laws, let's put the GDPR, let's put the CCPA and all the regulations in there to limit technology from doing that. An example outside of technology that has happened is, think about mining, think about the oil pipelines, right? And I know this could be a sensitive area for some audience, but there are companies in there that could literally mine anywhere, take resources from any part of the country, and pollute every single river stream that there is out there, to meet their bottom line and to make profit. But we know that there are laws and there are regulations in place to limit companies from doing that. If you're gonna mine and pollute the river and the stream for everybody else, then you're not gonna mine, right? Even if it affects your bottom line. And laws have been passed to stop that. And so what we're seeing is those laws are coming into the digital age to protect citizens, to say, you know what, you might want to meet your bottom line, but if you're gonna do that at the expense of citizens and users, then we're going to have to put laws. And this is where GDPR came into place. CCPA in California and a lot of states, Nevada, Maine, are all poised to pass their own regulatory laws to say, this is the kind of data you can collect. This is how you can use that data. This is how you should not be able to use that data. And you have to give people the option to opt out if they want to delete their data if they want to have that data deleted, and laws are being passed. Now, the
So
last,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just could you explain just for people who haven't heard of these terms, what GDPR is and the CCPA in California and so forth. Just what do those stand for, and what are those laws?
Yeah, so very good question. Yeah, so GDPR stands for the General Data Protection. Is a regulation passed by the EU to limit how companies can collect and use um, data within the EU ecosystem. So it applies to EU citizens. If you're a citizen of the EU bloc, GDPR applies to you. And there are 7 pillars for GDPR. What it means is there has to be the data being collected has to be limited. So you have to collect data just for what you're using. It has to be accurate. One of the key pillars in there that I really enjoy personally is the right to forget. So if you call up Facebook, or if you call up a company that is part of the GDPR um, block, and you say, hey, I want you to remove every data you have about me in your systems, in your databases, companies are obligated by law to comply to that. Otherwise, they get fined. So a combination of limiting the amount of data that is collected, providing transparency for the way data is collected. I'm sure if you go to websites today and you see there is many websites will have the something about cookies. Do you accept? Right. A lot of that is in response to the GDPR law. So you have to opt in to say, I want you to collect my cookies, right? And if you don't want to, you can deny that. So that's GDPR from the EU. In response to that, in the US, California did pass the CCPA, which protects citizens in California. And basically, it stands for the California Consumer Protection Act. That's what CCPA stands for. It provides a lot of what GDPR does, with a few things that are limited to California citizens, and other states are very much in line to passing their own laws. So if you live in states that's other than California, I would encourage you to check in with your state laws and see what's going on, what the legislation is doing. I do know a lot of states are either very close to passing theirs, or they're adopting something very similar to what CCPA is. But there is a groundswell around these regulations and a lot of discussions happening here in the US and even outside, in Brazil, in Chile, in South Africa, in China, Japan. Almost every country is responding to these privacy concerns by, asking their legislations to pass laws to protect the consumers.
So, and thank you very much. That was a great explanation. One thing, and there are a few points you brought up that I'd like to get to, but one is, does GDPR or any of the similar pieces of legislation you mentioned, do they talk about internal controls within a company? Right. So the characteristics you described outlined sort of controls that consumers have over the ways that companies handle their information. But and this might be a silly example, but I'm thinking just in the past couple of weeks, I think it was Amazon fired an employee who had been checking on the orders of I believe it was an ex-girlfriend or something, or ex-wife, something
yeah,
like that.
terrible.
Yeah, and you hear about stories like this every so often, and I'm wondering, do these regulations protect consumers against internal, or do they provide internal control or regulations for internal controls at these companies?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question, because from the surface, the rights, and it's almost like the Bill of Rights that are in the GDPR. It stipulates what is required, right? The right to be informed, the right to access and rectification, erasure, and the 8 other rights. That's what it says. Now, how that gets implemented behind the scenes is it's not very prescriptive in that nature. But to comply to it, companies have to rethink their internal processes. Very similar to SOX here in the US. Oxley back in the 2000s, that was passed from a financial perspective. And what that means is companies now in the trying to meet the GDPR requirements are building internal infrastructure internal systems with governance to comply to that. So one area that I see a lot is let's take lineage as an example. So lineage meaning thinking about how data is collected, what sources is data collected from, where that data is stored internally within the systems, um, who has access to those systems, who queried, and this is where that example you brought up is a really good one. Who has queried that system at any point in time? What records did they see? Why did they touch that? Are they authorized and authenticated to touch that? So authorization or authentication to touch that system, and for what reason? So if there is an audit that comes in to an organization, they have to prove that. They have to prove that they are GDPR compliant or HIPAA compliant. HIPAA is another big one, especially for the medical space, right? And part of that compliance is being able to prove those things. And the case in point you brought up, for companies that don't do that, and you have the rogue employee that goes and does something unacceptable, then there are fines, right? So it's not just a goodwill effort. It's not just, okay, we're going to trust you that you secure this data. There are audits that do come in to say, how are you securing this data? If somebody queries this data from your database to look up, the orders of a girlfriend, or there was something, I believe, was that in Florida, of some cop looking up the records of some, it seems to happen with romantic relationships that it definitely seems to happen a lot like that. And they were looking up the records of some other lady that was arrested to use it for some romantic interest, right? But why did they do it? Because the system allowed them to do it. So it's not just a goodwill thing. You have to use technologies, you have to use systems and tools that even if somebody wants to look at it, it would prevent them from doing it. And there's a lot of software in the industry helping around that from a governance perspective, tagging and lineage and all of that to solve that problem.
So you mentioned the right to forget, and when I first contacted you about this interview, I asked you specifically about control over posthumous data. So what happens to our data after we die? And so coming from the question about or the point about the right to forget. Just to get because a lot of people, I think, don't even think about what happens to their data after they die. In your experience working with companies and building enterprise scale big data applications, first off, is this issue addressed? Is there planning, contingency planning for consumers being or obviously relatives of consumers being able to manage data about someone after that person passes? Is that addressed, and if so, how?
Very good question. So I would say it's something that we're seeing a groundswell around, especially with the wake-up call that companies are getting as a result of GDPR and CCPA. They're all responding to this, and it's very interesting that the right to forget is one of the pillars in GDPR. And what I see on the enterprise side is companies are responding, and the systems they're building is built to accommodate things like this. So both on the technology allows for it. So with the term I use is tagging. So if a data set is coming in and you have the appropriate tags to say this is sensitive data, or this data is PII information, or this is health information, and you can tag the data appropriately, and you know what user that data applies for. So if I call up to say Facebook, and I want them to get rid of all my data, number one is knowing where they have my data stored, and this is a wicked problem, right? And I don't want to make this seem trivial, because it's not just go to this one database and you're gonna see all the customer information and you can delete that information and you're good, right? It's not that trivial. It's literally, especially for these larger organizations I work with, they might have a CRM system, and the CRM is basically a customer, relationship management system. They might have an ERP system, enterprise resource planning. They might have a marketing system for running their marketing campaigns. They might have a sales system, and they could have all these different systems where you have pieces of your data scattered all over in an organization. So when you make that request to that company, to an organization, to say, I want all my data deleted from your enterprise, now the organization first needs to know where that data is stored. And this is having a solid governance infrastructure is key from the beginning. And with the right tags and the right policies in place that companies can build, they can say, all right, your data is in this system, this system, this system, and we can issue a command to go delete from those systems. The organizations that are on the forefront are implementing that, and I can tell you a lot of organizations are hiring people to come in and ensure that they have the capacity to do that. Of course, not everyone is on the same maturity level, but if you just do a Google a search on roles like chief data officer or chief information officer or chief privacy officer, that those roles are increasing in popularity. Why? Because companies need people to come in and make sure those privacy things are in place. They understand where their customers' data are all stored, and they have the technology to delete from those systems if that request comes in. Because if you don't, there's going to be a huge, huge, huge fine. So a lot of companies are really responding to that from what I see.
So when you were talking about GDPR, that I feel was, I mean, you mentioned that there's, an equivalent piece of legislation in California, and we're starting to see it in some other states. But obviously, GDPR is a European initiative, and I feel like it kind of emphasizes or highlights some of the cultural differences between the EU and the United States, and we're actually seeing that in a few episodes this season of the podcast. And I know that you really are a big believer that that society's relationship with big data is determined by culture. So I guess what I want to ask is, what does culture mean for big data? And conversely, what does big data mean for culture? How do these forces impact each other?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we always think about technology as being on the frontier and driving innovation, pushing the boundaries and going out there. But we live in a culture, especially in the US, which is from a political perspective, and I'm not savvy at all when it comes to politics, but I would say for the most part it tends to be very centered, right? Not to the left, not to the right. People don't want to rock up things too much, and people want to be conservative in terms of their privacy and their data, and that's why even going to the legal side, you need warrants to come into somebody's house and to search, right? You can't just jump into somebody's house and knock down the door and search for whatever you want. And so there's always been, really from the inception of this country, of the US, that idea that you should have a secret space, that privacy is a first class citizen here, and that should be respected. If you're gonna intrude into my private space, you should have very good reasons to do so. And even if it's the government should have really good reasons to do so. That hasn't always been the case. We know this of different scenarios with the NSA and some of the things that they've done that might have gone past that. But culturally, people still have that expectation of privacy. And so we're seeing this push of the innovators are coming up with these technologies, and they're running 100 miles per hour at the front, but the culture is saying, we gotta slow down here, and we gotta make sure, let's think what we're doing. If we're gonna use an algorithm, is this algorithm ethical? If we're gonna collect data, are we collecting the right data? So there's really this balance between the culture and the technology. I describe it as three pillars at play. There is the technology, there is the politics, and then there is culture. And each of those are influencing each other. Now, if technology goes too far, what happens is culture and people would say, we don't want this. We want the laws. We want the privacy. And they're going to push politics to pass those laws that limit technology. And it's a yin-yang, right? And then you can also have technology changing, influencing culture to get along. So it's a balancing act of culture and people getting used to their data being collected, and if they don't want it, they respond by asking the legislators to pass the laws to limit that. It's always it's a moving target. I wouldn't say culture is static. We all could agree that culture isn't static. When I was young, and I'm not gonna date myself here, uh, it was terrible. It was terrible. People could not imagine, imagine can I having a device in your room that has a camera, and that device is connected to the internet and can listen to what you're saying. Like, that would people couldn't even imagine that 10 years ago, right? Now there are people who find that okay, and there are a lot of people who don't find that okay, and I'm sure your audience, would fall into some of those categories.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this cultural shift where some people find that okay, but there's still a vast majority of people that don't find it okay, and they want politics to respond to limit technology, and that three balance is what I tend to see in the industry.
So I'm gonna, as we're getting closer to the end here, I'm gonna ask you to take off your professor hat and put on your advocacy hat, and what with everything you just said in mind, what changes would you like to see in terms of how big data applications are envisioned, designed, deployed, and managed?
Very good question, and I'll answer that with a story here that happened for us. It was a big deal here in the Midwest, where there was this large multinational company, and it's in the retail space, and there was a husband or a father that had a daughter, and apparently this daughter was pregnant, and the father didn't know that. And so the father kept getting mails coming to the house, delivered to the house, talking about pregnancy or buy stuff for a kid. And the father was just shocked. Like, why is this company sending these coupons to their house, targeting the daughter? So he took that, stomped into into the location, and was asking to talk to somebody. My daughter is still a teenager. I can't understand why you guys keep sending us these things to promote, pregnancy. Are you trying to get her pregnant? And long story short, and you can read about this in the news, the father eventually found out that the daughter was actually pregnant. She did not even know she was pregnant, but that organization had found out, and this is true story. You can read about it in the news here. And the daughter didn't even know she was pregnant, but that organization somehow, using data, knew that she was pregnant. And how did they know this? Well, based on the buying pattern. So if you walk into a store and you buy, I don't know the exact stuff that she bought that led to them figuring this out, but if you buy a combination of maybe sweets and tissue and this thing, people who tend to buy those combination of things are people who are pregnant. And so they can use this as skill to look at their population to now figure out that some lady is pregnant before she even knows. This is what scares a lot of people when we share stories like this, because somebody somewhere can look at it and say, yeah, it helps us sell more tampons, or it helps us sell more stuff in the store. But is that really what you want? Did you get the consent of that customer that that's what you should be doing? What does that mean for the relationship between the dad and the daughter for them to figure this out that way? So these are the ethical questions that even if companies are able to meet their bottom line, they have to grapple with. Technology gives us the capability to do a lot of things. There are a lot of questions you can ask if you have the data at hand. But the question is, should you ask that question? That's really what companies have to grapple with.
That was a really powerful anecdote, and yeah, no, I think that was a really great answer to my question. It makes me wonder. Just out of curiosity, do you have an Alexa or a Google Home anywhere where you live?
It's actually, that's really a good thing. A really good question. My girlfriend did get me one, and I can tell you I haven't used it. I consider myself a digital minimalist. I use I'm a technologist, but I'm a minimalist too. So Alexa and some of those, my phone is more than enough for me to handle. I don't know if I get a lot of value for some of those, but
So
yeah.
before we sign off, I wanted to ask. I see you're a volunteer for an organization called Books for Africa, and
Yes, I
so I was
am.
wondering, what that organization does. And I guess one reason I wanted to ask about that is, given your IT heavy background, why have you
Mhm.
chosen to channel your volunteer efforts on such a low tech initiative?
That's really a good question, and thank you for asking that. Because I'm a huge believer in literacy. I just think literacy is the biggest liberating factor you can offer any individual. Originally, I came from West Africa, grew up in a very, very, very tiny village without a lot of opportunity. I share the story of, today I work with high tech. I speak with companies across the world, travel to different continents to talk about technology and how companies solve these problems. But my background really was very low tech. I learned computers in an environment where we literally did not have computers, and I had to. The professor or the teacher had to draw on the board to say, this is what the computer looks like, this is what the mouse is, and that's how I got my introduction to computers. So I've always been fascinated by the power of computers for good, right? There's obviously the challenges that comes with it, making sure we're secure and governed. But as a little kid, I was always fascinated by that. Now, the Books for Africa that I volunteer and I support and I care a lot about is helping bring the knowledge and the literacy to the African continent. So it could collect a lot of books, ship containers of books to different areas, and books are being a time tested medium for knowledge sharing, and so that's a really good avenue. Now, why books? I'll give you a story. I visited my village that was back 3 years ago or so, and you go into some areas and there's no Wi-Fi, right? That would be I know some of the viewers might be surprised that you go to an area and there's no Wi-Fi in 2021, but there are areas that there is no Wi-Fi. And so if I took a podcast or a video and I wanted somebody to watch, they just cannot even watch it because they don't have that connectivity. But you can get the book to them, right? There's nothing that limits you from getting a book to them. Uh, so that's why I get really passionate about books. I'm a big book reader myself. I've written books myself. So being able to take that knowledge and democratize access to it at scale is something that I'm extremely passionate about. But as technology comes in and maybe the medium of consumption grows, it might go beyond books. But books have been around for centuries, and so it's a very time tested medium, and that's what I care a lot about.
Well, so Fru, I really want to thank you for taking the time today. This has been a really insightful explanation of a lot of the. I mean, these issues are kind of core to modern society, but it's hard to get just a real explanation about what they really are. When you see it covered in the news, again, it becomes very kind of sensational and abstracted. And I
Yeah.
really appreciate how you've helped us kind of get into some of the details for a better understanding.
Yeah, and thanks for that. And the last thing I'll just add there is, as we're talking about literacy here, what we're also seeing is this push for, and that's something that I'm also really passionate about, is the push for data literacy, and we're seeing a groundswell around that, because people tend not to fear what they know. If they don't understand data, they don't understand why data is collected. It could be very scary. And so a lot of companies, there are organizations that are investing in data literacy to help people understand what is data, why is data being collected, and even to basic things like the cookie settings on your browser. There is a whole big push that is happening right now of being led by Apple, taking away cookies from browsers. And so companies like Facebook's and Google are all trying to respond to that, to come up with new models for being able to still run their business by selling ads. And so the technology is changing. There's a lot of groundswell and changes coming up with basic settings of cookies. I would ask an average person, do you know on your browser where to go and turn off the cookie on your browser if you don't want a company to get your data and follow you around as you go on different sites? Being able to do that, I think, is a step, right? And this data literacy and privacy literacy is something that would be very relevant in this whole discourse of privacy and governance and security for individuals to keep themselves secure while allowing companies to still deliver the value that they want to deliver, but making sure that they do so by respecting people's privacy. Privacy being an opt-in solution, not an opt-out solution. That's where we're seeing that change going. You should opt in to get the ads. Right now, we are in a opt-out situation where you have to opt out. So you opted in by default, and you have to physically opt out. By 2023, I can tell you, with the way Apple is going and how Chrome is going, is gonna go to opt in by you're gonna have to opt in if you want to be a part of it, and you're gonna be opted out by default. So that's gonna be a huge change that people should be seeing.
So where can people connect with you to either chat or to learn more? Is there a URL or social handles you want to share?
Yeah, thanks. I'll do a little bit of a plug-in here. Yeah, I'm available online in many different spaces. I talk a lot about technology. I do have a channel on YouTube called Tech with Fru, where I discuss topics like this related to data, related to technology, related to algorithms. So if anyone wants to check that out, Tech with Fru on YouTube, or you can check me out on my blog where I write about emerging technologies at techwithfru.io. It's an amazing blog. And I just put out content in there that could be relevant for folks that are interested in hearing about these topics.
Excellent. Well, again, Fru, thank you so much. This has been a really great interview. I really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you. It's a great platform you have, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Wow. Well, that was really that was really insightful. As always, I'm joined here by my co-host Stephanie. Stephanie, what did you think?
Wow. That was a really interesting interview. And I will say I feel much more data literate and comforted by the fact that I now kind of understand more about the scope of how data is collected and the conversations that companies are having, as well as governments, around ethical use of data.
Yeah, and he spoke in such accessible language, which I feel like it's kind of hard to get discussions that go into this kind of depth and detail, but are also still accessible to people. So I really appreciated that. A couple of things,
especially about data as well, like interesting and accessible.
Yeah. So a couple of things I took out of that was it. I mean, and Stephanie, I have a background in tech. I mean, not for a few years, but I spent decades in it. But even so, just getting a better appreciation of just the scope of what big data means today. I feel like that was very illuminating.
Yeah, you mean how in the last 2 years we've collected more data than since the dawn of man? I noted that as well, and
yeah, I do mean that.
It was definitely an eye-opening statistic or way to gauge how much data we're collecting. Because in 2 years we'll have collected twice that, but probably more as the capabilities also increase.
Yeah.
So, and the velocity also increases. So, yeah.
And another thing that I thought was really useful was because, again, when you see this covered in the news, you see things like it's all about advertising. And obviously advertising drives a huge amount of this business and online commerce and business overall. But I think the examples he gave in things like healthcare and education really do show that there is value being created for consumers out of big data. Now, that doesn't mean, we still shouldn't have these important discussions about where boundary lines are and what control should exist. But it's not all just about advertising and Facebook. Big data is providing value for consumers in multiple areas of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's understated, in at least in the United States, about how the health aspect and the education aspect. And I really was happy that he brought those two components in because they are so key. There are so many ways that we can collect data that will help have tailored medications for individuals. And I believe he said better life and better health. And that's really, really important. But also what I loved is the education factor, the concept of having tailored individual personalized approach to each student. And I think he said, as an example, if a student is struggling in one subject, give them more time with that subject rather than an equal amount of time across all subjects, including ones that they don't struggle with. And I just thought, well, duh, what a great, approach and a great, great use of data to help make the world smarter.
And once again, because we're seeing this in a few episodes this season, but the discussion today just showed again how much further ahead the EU is than the United States in terms of confronting and managing issues like this. I mean, in today, he brought up how, for instance, California has a law that's very close to the European law, and other states are in various stages of enacting laws like this. So at the state level, it's not the same story across all 50 states. But as a country, the U.S. just feels really far behind on a lot of these core issues that are just central to modern life.
Yeah, I agree, and it's I don't know what to say other than I agree.
Yeah. Well, and just before finishing up, there was one other thing I wanted to highlight, and I just because I'm kind of the same way. He's a tech expert who's a tech minimalist, and he doesn't he's a big believer in a lot of this stuff. It's not only his career. He clearly feels for it. He sees the value in it. He sees the importance in it, and yet he still doesn't get every device that he can. In fact, when given an Alexa, he doesn't even use it, and I just love that. That's so much part of the healthier tech message, and I didn't know that when I booked him for the show, but that I really appreciated him pointing that out.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good approach. It's the approach that I think you and myself both have as well, where just because we have the option, now we kind of discern a little bit, like, yeah, do I actually need Alexa? Probably not. So I
ask
don't.
Alexa. Hey, Alexa, do I really need you?
No, I'm Team Siri.
Well, even better. Ask Siri if you need Alexa. Well, that does it for today's episode. Remember, if you like this show and want to hear more, please subscribe. The Healthier Tech Podcast, available on all major podcasting platforms. And if you have a moment, please also leave a review. Reviews are really critical to help more people find this podcast and learn about the important and undercovered topics that we discuss. Also, you can learn more and sign up for our mailing list to get notified when we have new interviews, webinars, ebooks, and sales at shieldyourbody.com. You can also just click that link in the show notes. While you're there at shieldyourbody.com, you can check out our world-class catalog of laboratory-tested EMF and 5G protection products. Don't forget to use promo code POD to save 15% on your first order from shieldyourbody.com with free shipping throughout North America and Europe. Until next time, I'm R. Blank, and I want to thank you so much for tuning into the Healthier Tech Podcast. Always remember to shield your body.